So thanks again for joining us today. My name is Jillian Dale, and I am one of the STEM specialists for Boxlight. I specifically work with the East Coast, but my territory is about half the United States. So between Braden and I, we got the whole US covered. So thanks again for joining us on STEM Wednesday. Today we're going to be talking about STEM for early education. And we'll dive into that. But before we get started, just a little bit of background on me. My name is Jillian Dale. I'm a former STEM teacher, and I was also a fourth grade teacher. I was an instructional coach and the program director for STEM for Girls. And I've always loved, education and specifically STEM education because I really think that you can see different funds of knowledge and different multiple intelligences within your STEM classroom when you give your students the ability to start building and learning in different ways. So that's a little bit about my background and my information. All right, so for my first audience question, I'm just going to have you use the chat rather than using a poll. Oops. So what I would like for you to do is go ahead and post in the chat any career that you know in STEM. So any STEM career. Already got some stuff going on. Mechanical engineer. Yep, there's tons of different types of engineer. A doctor. Yes, absolutely. A doctor would be. A computer scientist. Yes. Um, my husband likes to remind me that logistics is absolutely a STEM career because he's constantly doing engineering in his job. Disney Imagineer. Awesome. Yeah, that's very relevant for me right now since I'm in Orlando. Awesome. Thank you, Preston. Yeah, internet technology, a carpenter, absolutely a STEM career. There's lots of math going on in there. Thank you for that. Okay, so let's talk about, why we're here for today. The reason that we're here for today is because there's a huge need for STEM education starting at an early age. STEM jobs are growing. STEM jobs are expected to grow 10% in the next 10 years, where non-STEM jobs are only expected to grow about 5%. That's a pretty significant difference. And not to mention, they're also more lucrative than non-STEM jobs. On average, people are going to make a lot more money in a STEM career versus a non-STEM career. Engagement is absolutely essential before age 11 or by fifth grade. If students are not engaged by fifth grade in STEM, 97% of girls and 92% of boys start to develop the idea that STEM is not for them and are less likely to choose a career in STEM. Age 11 is pretty early to be making that big of a life decision. And so it's really important that we expose students to STEM at an early age to make sure they're getting those skills in order to start using them elsewhere. There's also evidence that STEM in early years leads to positive language and literacy outcomes in later years. And also, all of these skills are transferable. What you might use in, science class doing a STEM project could also easily be translated into your social studies classroom. Persisting through problems, is definitely part of the engineering design process. So, speaking of those skills, in the chat, go ahead and answer what kind of skills students can strengthen through STEM. Okay, thank you for those. Yeah, so I'm seeing a lot of skills in like problem solving, engineering, awesome. Social skills, working on projects as a team, absolutely. These are all great skills that we can get just through STEM. So let's talk about some of them more specifically. So we want our students to be able to use their prior knowledge and also their imagination and trial and error. That's part of the engineering design process. We want them to develop that engineering mindset so that later in life, when they're actually making decisions and trying to improve certain outcomes, they're mindful of that engineering mindset and making sure that they're thinking through everything, and putting their best foot forward. Critical thinking skills, absolutely. Problem solving skills, collaboration, It's so important for students to learn how to work together so that it sets them up to work with others in the future. And then social emotional skills. There's been a huge push lately to make sure that we have an SEL curriculum within all schools, and you can absolutely do that through STEM. We'll talk about a few different ways that you can start to work through those. So, if STEM, gives you all of these great things and it's so beneficial for students, well, then why aren't we all doing it? Well, there's a few reasons why we're not doing it. One, time. There's not enough time in the school day to include STEM. I hear this all the time. And I'm going to talk about how we can address this issue. Same thing with materials. I don't have access to STEM materials. Okay, no problem. We're going to figure out a workaround for that. And, lack of STEM professional development or experience. I hear, I didn't go to school for engineering, I went for education. I get it. Trust me, I get it. But I'm going to teach you a few different strategies today on how to address these roadblocks to start working on STEM in your classroom. Okay, so first thing, you can do some hands-on experiments. I always like to include I notice, I wonder. It was a big push at my last school actually in our literacy intervention, but it's useful for every content area. And so, I notice the world around me. I wonder, why the sky is blue. That's a very general one, but that could be along the lines of what you do. Okay, so you want your hands-on experiment to be a STEM lesson, but you can plan that lesson so that it's addressing multiple standards all within the same lesson. That's going to help take care of that time component. You say that you don't have enough time to teach the STEM lesson. Well, if you're incorporating a language arts standard, a math standard, a science standard, and also a computer skills standard all in the same lesson, that's going to help you out with time management. You can start with simple problems and have your students explore and think through them. So, for example, you could ask your students, I wonder how many buckets of sand it will take to fill up this table. They're going to be thinking about reasoning and relative sizes. They're going to be making predictions. They're going to be strategizing about procedures and the process for your way of actually loading the sand onto the table. And then they're also going to have to organize and communicate their data and also their understanding. So there's some metacognition going on in here as well. So a few other sample questions or problems that you can just ask your kids that you can start a discussion about it, or you can actually do the experiment. How many marshmallows come in one box of Lucky Charms? Or how many steps does it take to get to the gym? I personally like that one because you have your students define the step. Well, whose step? Is it Billy's step or is it George's step? You have to add on that extra intel to make sure that your data is conveyed clearly. And then a third one, do you think that these, a bunch of random objects will sink or will they float? Give your evidence or reasoning to support that. Okay, and then finally, for your hands-on experiments, get creative. You can use recycled materials, natural materials, things that you find outside, leaves that have fallen onto the ground. You could use a lot of different things. Educational grants and local resources, they're all over the place. You just have to look for them and apply for them. And if you need any assistance with that, Boxlight has a grants department, and we can absolutely help you write grants to get some of the materials that you might need. Now, finally, Dollar Tree hacks. If you look on Pinterest and type in Dollar Tree STEM experiments, you can find a ton of different things that you can start working with your students at an early age, and do it at a low cost, and it's very, very engaging different activities that your students can do. The focus for, you don't have the training, you didn't go to school to be an engineer, you went to be a teacher. I get that. So focus more so on the process rather than the content. You don't need to be able to answer why the sky is blue, but if you can help your students come up with some kind of, inferences or making guesses, hypotheses about why the sky actually is blue, that's really all you need to do. You just need to help guide your students to the right path. But we don't have to be subject matter experts to start working through some of these STEM activities. The content is really what they learn, and the process is how they learn it. So when you're planning, focus on that process. The goal should be to build skills in problem solving, critical thinking, reasoning, and then also justifying your findings. And these specific elements should be built within the lesson plan. Okay, one of my very, very favorite activities is exploring the natural world. Why? Because it's free. You get to take your kids outside. They love to be outside, and then the possibilities are endless. You never know what you're going to see that day. So, a lot of the times, what I would do is I would take my students outside and I would say, okay, let's just use our senses. What do you hear, smell, see, taste, and feel? There's you're going to get 10 different answers if you ask 10 different kids. And that's one of the beauties of being in STEM and being collaborative. Another activity that I love to do is the square of life. So you can see in the picture, she has sort of set up her 1 foot by 1 foot square using, I think, chopsticks and yarn. And then so she's just monitoring, what kind of walks through her square of life. If there's some little critters that walk through there, if there's some rocks in there, if there's some grass growing in there, maybe a butterfly flies over through it. So she's just documenting, everything that she sees in her 1 by 1 square of life. Okay, so I kind of mentioned the materials earlier, but you can really get creative when you're talking about STEAM. So incorporating the art piece of it in the natural world. So thinking about the natural materials that you could use: leaves, twigs, fruits, grasses, rocks, feathers, flower petals, pine cones. You could pretty much use anything that you find outside. And that's a great way to also teach students about environmental sustainability as well. Okay, so let's talk about discourse. Discourse is basically just getting your students talking, having them have a conversation. So what I like to do in my classroom is we always talked about, like, what's this learning supposed to look like? If somebody were to step in my classroom right now, what does active learning look like? And so you need to have these conversations with your kids and then come up with some ideas or norms together to make sure that it's an inviting and inclusive learning environment where students feel safe and comfortable. Because one big thing about STEM is you have to be okay with getting things wrong. And for a lot of young students, it's embarrassing when you get things wrong. We have to change that mindset, and the best way to do that is to talk to your students about what happens when you get something wrong you know so come up with some kind of a collaborative classroom norm list, and you'll see over on my example, if we're talking about, like, what does working together look like? We can say, okay, well, it looks like happy kids. It looks like organized. It looks like friends playing. What does it sound like? It sounds quiet. It sounds like inside voices, certain things like that. But addressing those roadblocks before you actually incur them. What do I do when I disagree with someone else? That's a really important question for kids to answer, and it's hard to do in that moment. So it's important to establish those norms for your STEM classroom, your STEM space, before you actually release your kids into it. Okay, so here's some sample questions to prompt your discourse. So, in these questions, they could be questions that you actually do find the answer to, or questions that you're just discussing. It's completely up to you. So, I wonder how many meals the cafeteria makes each day. I noticed some trees don't have leaves in the winter. Why do you think some trees lose their leaves? What devices do you use at home or school, and how do they help you? What happens when you mix different colors of paint? Can you create new colors? And then also one of my favorites, the would you rathers questions. Would you rather work outside or inside? Would you rather work with animals or work with people? They don't have to be about working, but those are just the two examples that I used. If you were on one of our previous STEM Wednesdays and learned a little bit about GPT, Chat GPT is a great resource for you to just get some sample prompts for discourse. Okay. So, another great way to start exposing STEM in early grades is through literature and role models. So, every year, the NSTA releases the best children's books on STEM for the year. And so, you can go to that website and you can look at previous years, you can look at the upcoming year. But the most recent list is from 2022, and it's got a bunch of different titles on it. But some of my favorites from there are The Most Magnificent Thing by Ashley Spires, which teaches you the beauty of the engineering design process. And then also a student favorite is the Who Was or Who Is collection. I cannot tell you how many times that my students check this book out of my classroom library. I mean, they love nonfiction, and when they can read about some of these people, they get inspired. And there's a lot of people in STEM included in the Who Was collection as well. Okay, so next STEM Wednesday, there's a little QR code for you to scan so you can get signed up. But you're going to be joining Preston next week as he talks about 3D printing for community outreach. And if you've been to a STEM Wednesday with Preston before, you know you are in for a treat. He does such a great job with making sure that the audience is participating and making sure that he conveys the information clearly. Okay. All right. Well, that was a lot of talking, but thank you so much for joining me today. STEM is definitely something that is very near and dear to my heart. So I want to make sure that students start working with STEM at an early age. And a great way to do that is by some of the strategies we just talked about today. So if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat. I'll hang out for just a minute. And if you want any more information on any of the products that Boxlight offers, always feel free to reach out. But thank you again for attending the STEM Wednesday. I look forward to seeing everybody again next week. And again, that's going to be with Preston on 3D printing for community outreach.